Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Econ Playground. I'm here today with my friend Anna Claire Flowers, who just recently graduated from George Mason University with her PhD. And in the fall, she's going to start as an assistant professor of economics in the Campbell School of Business at Berry College. And she's also going to work as a family policy fellow with the Archbridge Institute. So welcome, Anna Claire.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So what we're going to talk about today is her recent dissertation, which is partially published, and the rest of it will hopefully be published soon on the economics of childcare. Right. A topic
Right.
that a lot of people talk about when people talk about things like, oh, how are people making their trade-offs between leisure and labor? What are things that limit particularly women's labor force participation? And what are just parts of the general rise of cost of living that a lot of people are concerned about? And Anna Claire's actually done some what we call field work in economics, in that she has a child that needs care of its own, right? So we might be interrupted by him at some point in the.
Yes, we may. He's making an appearance while he
Okay, very good.
while he sleeps, hopefully.
Yeah. So just first, as a general overview question, what made you interested in this topic, other than the field work that you did?
Yeah. Well, I was interested in it a long time before I became a mom. But I think it was just this tension that, I was blessed to have the opportunity to have a lot of education and loved it and had this vision towards the end of undergrad of wanting to come back and teach in a liberal arts college setting, and really just what to do with those opportunities and in tension with my desire to also have a large family. How could that work? I had not had a whole lot of people who around me who seemed to be thinking about these questions that I was kind of mulling over throughout undergrad. And then I met Clara Piano, who was one of my professors. Right after she finished her PhD at GMU, she started at Samford, which is where I went to undergrad. And she was working on topics of um, marriage and religion, family formation, fertility, economic freedom, just all the things that I was sort of mulling over. And I finally realized it was sort of a career path in itself to study these things. So another thing I'll say is I had a podcast of my own sort of in college and was interested in sort of like community, civil society, civic engagement, things like that. And so I would talk to people who were academics and um, or like leaders in the church or things like that. And I really was like, I want to be on the other side one day and like want to be an expert on something. So I just sort of decided to pursue this with everything I had and have am now on the other side, I guess, with
Yeah,
a little bit of expertise.
at least the begin. As soon as you finish grad school, you're like, now I'm going to start working.
Yeah,
It's a very bizarre feeling, but
yeah.
yeah. When I first met you, it was at Appy, and you were still an undergrad and had one of these poster boards. And then when I saw your topic and that you were working with you were at Samford, I was like, oh, obviously one of Claire's students, right?
Yes.
No,
Yes.
very nice.
I started with big aspirations um of thinking about the effects of abortion on like fertility rates and just the macroeconomy. I quickly realized that was just like a ginormous question that I could not hope to answer. I hope to look into more in my lifetime, but it was way too big.
Hmm.
So we had to keep narrowing like the question, and we eventually got to childcare as sort of a politically relevant, salient topic to sort of dive in on.
Yeah, starting small and then, but keeping the big picture in mind is always what
Yes.
motivates and keeps you going forward. Yeah. Okay, so how about we dig into the actual topic here? The first chapter that you have is, I guess, more abstract, more theoretical, right?
Hmm.
And the main thing that you're talking about is people think of childcare as in the species of what economists call human capital. That is, skills or practices that are attached to a person, right? Things that I
Yeah.
know how to do. Maybe cognitive skills. You might think of it that way. Um,
Right.
but you're talking about two different approaches. One, the neoclassical approach, and the other, the Austrian approach. So, what's the difference between those two approaches to human capital, and how does that relate to childcare?
Yeah. So I mean, the interesting thing about the neoclassical model of human capital that we think about today is that it was really never intended to be a basis for entire political programs or government programs. It was just an application of rational choice theory that individuals make decisions about what kind of training and education to invest in based on their expected payoffs. So a couple of things that go into that decision calculus, like how old am I? How long do I expect to be working? And what's the timeline of those payoffs? Obviously, they also have like subjective knowledge of like other costs and benefits that are going into that choice about education or training. Um, and so once I, realized that and, definitely appreciate the work of Becker and others on this, it totally revolutionized economics with this new field, kind of thinking about applications to those human, other parts of decision making, including family, but obviously labor market too. Um, I realized like a lot of the political language involves human capital, uh, rationales. Like we're going to see X returns to this investment, and that can be, either through parents' workforce participation or just like kind of long term outcomes that you see from like investing in kids, right? So the difference I think between, if we're thinking more theoretically between that sort of payoff structure that's like, okay, at point A, I can sort of like predict, at least the way it's been used politically, predict these outcomes and payoffs and project that into the future. Um, the way it contrasts the Austrian view of human capital is just like Austrian capital theory is going to emphasize uncertainty, heterogeneity between like different parts that are, being combined to invest in something. Also, complementarity between different skills if you're applying it to human capital. Um, and so, when I'm looking at childcare specifically, it's like, okay, well, that seems to be more a better description of what's actually happening. Is like, okay, each kid is different, each place, family, like small context, labor market is different. And
Mm-hmm.
also you've got those complementarities between the formal educational investments and also the home and other sites of investment. So that really resonated with, I think, the what I had learned about Austrian capital theory. And I didn't have to put it in those terms, but just for kind of like placing it in the literature, it seems like one
Mm-hmm.
direction, one way you could describe it.
It seems like the neoclassical human capital theory might make certain broad claims that are true. Like if I expect to live a longer time, investing more in skills, abstractly stated today, is going to have a longer payoff over my lifetime. That's probably true, but that's a truth that's on average that we can't that each person might actually have local knowledge that the average is totally irrelevant to them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for so can you tell us exactly how that applies to childcare in the sense of what kinds of local knowledge might someone have about their kid such that they know that childcare is not good for their kid right now, or that they need childcare in to a higher or a different degree than other people would expect that they have.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think one thing that's crucial to point out is that when governments take that human capital theory that's theorized at the individual level and then scale it up to kind of a societal investment, they're typically talking about something along the lines of universal childcare or universal access to childcare um, through subsidies, right? So in it, passing some kind of payroll tax or something like that, or New Mexico has diverted like some of their oil money towards
Hmm.
childcare. Um, whenever they're going to set out to make that social investment or that public investment in childcare, they've also got um, to some degree, like make it uniform. So it's when you ask about the local knowledge required, I think just want to take it back to that individual level of investment. So a parent might say, and this gets to quality too, like what's important for me in my family and our children is like being bilingual. Or, I work the night shift and we need care overnight, and that's never going to fit into like the public daycare model that is being funded. Or I have a family member that actually teaches at a nature preschool where most of the preschool is
Hmm.
outside, and
That's fun.
it's really good for little boys, like all, and girls too. But some families really prioritize that because, yeah, they have a different view of quality or a different understanding of education.
That's the weather
And
permitting.
whether,
Child.
well, no, it's rain or shine pretty
Oh,
much.
that's
They just
cool.
wear like rain suits.
That's cool.
Um, and they do have some indoor space if they need it. But yeah, and the way this I think scales up, if you're bringing it back to Austrian economics, is like we do pretty much have a widespread skills mismatch of some sort happening in our economy right now. So like we have really educated people. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's like we have, education inflation, degree inflation going on. And I think this can start all the way back at those early levels, but you
Huh.
can see just an illustration of like we think about malinvestment in human capital. You're sort of chugging along through the public education system, through maybe you get a government sponsored loan, student loan for college, and then you get to the end and you don't get the type of job that you're expecting. I think it just goes, should make us think about, going back to that individual level of should I invest in this or not, and not
Hmm.
necessarily making that decision at the social public level, which we
Yeah,
know
that's
is not really a
interesting.
thing.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to ask because I was reading through your paper and I was thinking, well, people do use this kind of at least rough model of how human capital works or what their college degree, when they're making decisions about college degrees, usually. They're
Hmm.
thinking about something like this when they're estimating how much is it worth me going to college, right? They're
Yeah.
thinking about, or which major am I going to pick? Which one has
Hmm.
the highest returns afterwards, right? And they're thinking about things like that. But so what are you saying that in a sense they're wrong to do something like that? Or is there what I think is more likely is that you're saying that there's kind of a misapplication that model might be useful to people in assessing their own private decisions, but there's a misuse of it in public policy, right? Does that make
Exactly.
sense?
There's a misapplication of this theory that's describing individual rational choice to
Mm-hmm.
say like we have this, public education brain that can make those allocations. And of course it's in this case it's the parents deciding on behalf of their kids, but there's all kinds of unintended consequences from like, you know, and sometimes policymakers are very explicit about like change, pulling these levers to try to change outcomes, right? So like they want more women in the workforce. Obviously, subsidizing childcare is going to change the relative costs of, how you care for your kids and who cares for them and that kind of thing. So um, that's just like one of the, uh, one of the consequences that comes from like abstracting this
Mm-hmm.
concept. Is just like, yeah, you're tinkering with family decisions that you don't really have access to, um, the
It, this,
knowledge
is-
they
this, is-
have.
this,
And
is- this is a little bit of an aside, but is there any discussion that something like universal childcare would help lower things like a gender wage gap because it would make it less likely that a woman would be I guess, have maternity leave and for longer time
Mhm.
periods and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in Europe, there's all kinds of event studies on this. I'm looking at what's been done in Germany just because it's like an interesting case study of, you know, German reunification in the 1990s. Like a lot of the family policies from East Germany were trying to kind of applied to both regions.
Hmm.
And, there are effects on the gender wage gap. Like there's almost no gender wage gap in Nordic countries, in certain other parts of Europe, but um, also there's at least in Germany, like the preservation of kind of local decision making over something like childcare, which I hope we would be able to see in the US the more that like we quote unquote invest in childcare, right? So in Germany, there are still certain parts of the country, especially in the Western region, where there's almost no childcare infrastructure, or the subsidies are going straight to churches and welfare associations that have
Mm.
provided these services for decades. Um, and so there's at least still some mechanism for like local values and kind of norms to persist. And the EU is very frustrated by that, honestly, that they
Huh.
can't like fix women's workforce participation um, by sort of like requiring these countries to like expand their childcare infrastructure because
Mhm.
some localities just don't want it.
And so this is a seems to be a theme across the whole thing in that the so those policies, if they have a measurable goal of trying
Mm-hmm.
to shrink the gender wage gap, it might come if the claims of your dissertation were correct, that this might have negative long-term consequences in the way that childcare is provided on the children, their not just their present welfare, but their long-term welfare is not represented in the political process when making those kinds of decisions, right? So that's a trade-off that doesn't get looked at. And the difference between those two trade-offs is not just it's not just the kids don't get to vote. It's that that one of those outcomes is much more measurable than the other. Women's labor force
Right.
participation is more measurable than childcare quality today, much less in 30 years, right? Or their
Mm-hmm.
effect on those same people in 30 years, right?
Yeah, and I don't even want to contrast those two as goals really, but I think the more interesting point, regardless of, I mean, you're really not going to see like any childcare policy like drastically change women's workforce participation at this point. Like it's growing steadily, like regardless of what happens, really. So it's hard with those event studies to even attribute it to universal childcare, but um, something that's true regardless is even when you have something like universal childcare, like very affordable, subsidized childcare, um, it's still only like ideal for a certain subset of the population.
Mm.
And in Quebec, there is a study of when they passed their like $20 a day childcare policy. It sort of was rolled out for different age groups,
Mm.
and more educated parents would be the ones to figure out like, okay, I need to be on this wait list at this time, and I need to sort of get ahead of the policy rollout so that my kids have a spot. And that's always, with New Mexico passing something similar, that's going to be the reality too, is like it benefits certain families who can kind of navigate the system. And then those that, need more flexibility, maybe work a 12-hour shift, like I said, work the nights or something like that, are just going to be outside of the range of people that it's really benefiting,
Yeah.
as well as those who just don't have the time and energy to try to like figure out the system, how to benefit from it.
Could you actually tell us a little bit more about the new New Mexico policy? Because I saw you wrote something on that as well. So what's exactly being
Yeah.
proposed, and what do you foresee some of the consequences?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much what I just described as far as it's going to be really good for some families. Basically, they've had very generous childcare subsidies for several years now, and the new policy rollout just eliminates like the income cap.
Mm.
So they've had, you can apply for um, subsidies that are paid like directly to the provider. Um, and if you can get one of those spots, you pay like a percentage of the full price according to your income. And they've kind of just done away with like the sliding scale or like the cap of that would allow you to not get those subsidies. So there's just going to be another influx of people looking for those spots. Um, they've admitted they need like thousands of more spots to be able to meet demand. And I guess my prediction is just that there's going to be a lot of um, non-market strategies for getting one of the spots. It's
Yeah,
kind of the same way
non-market
in
strategies whose success correlates with income.
exactly whose
Yeah.
success correlates with education and income. And it's pretty much what you see. Um, anywhere. I mean, France is famous for having like a great childcare system, but there's tons of non-market strategies going on for getting one of those spots.
Hmm.
And you do have to invest a lot of time and energy into getting the benefit. So
Yeah.
um, they have a unique, New Mexico does have a unique way of funding it that's different from like they're not necessarily raising taxes because of what I mentioned, this like oil trust that they have.
Hmm.
Um, Somewhere like New York City is going to have to raise taxes to actually provide universal childcare. And like I said, even then it won't be for everyone.
Yeah. So so even in these places where they are trying to subsidize demand for childcare to alleviate some of the cost of living problems, they have
Mm-hmm.
serious supply constraints, right?
Yes. And oddly enough, some states are even making that problem worse by trying to expand. Like, I actually just testified about this in Vermont because
Hmm.
they were trying to pass like an individual occupational licensing
Oh, wow.
board and requirement for all childcare workers. And they have a huge supply problem on the part of childcare providers. Um, but their thesis was that professionalizing the industry would make it more attractive.
Hmm.
So there's some like mismatch going on here.
Yeah. Well, and so
Um,
speaking of that, let's start talking a little bit about chapter two, which is specifically about the regulation of childcare markets. So,
yeah.
people probably imagine there are some kinds of regulations in childcare markets, just like most people assume. I think that's most people's way of solving asymmetric information problems nowadays. You just go, well, somebody probably regulated that before you buy it, right?
Hmm.
And that's probably what people think about childcare, but probably in ways that they don't exactly know. So in what ways, of course, in the United States, it's going to differ state by state, but in what ways are childcare typically regulated, and in what ways are they regulated that might surprise people?
Yeah. So the obvious ones are things like staff to child ratios,
Hmm.
how many kids can be with one adult, in a room, and then you have um, related to that is kind of group size, like how many smaller ratios ratio units can be like at the playground at once or
Hmm.
in the gym at once or something like that. And so they don't want, you know, 54-year-olds in the same space. They might cap it at 25 or something like that. Um, and then the others obvious ones are going to be education requirements for teachers and center directors, and then sort of like annual training requirements that the centers will have their staff do every year.
Hmm.
Those all go into the childcare regulation index that I've used, but there are some more surprising ones. One I think is interesting is state level restrictions on or regulations on like square footage. So
Hmm.
you might have to have like 80 square feet of indoor space per child and also 80 square feet of outdoor space per child. Well, that doesn't differentiate between urban and rural areas.
Right.
So it may be really hard to get that outdoor space in, you know,
New
downtown
York. Yeah.
New York or whatever. So also New York specifically, they can't have childcare businesses have to be on the first floor of a building.
So
Can't
the kids
be,
don't fall out the windows.
yeah,
Is
so
that?
they don't fall out the windows or something. Yeah, I guess there's some reason behind it, but just another surprising one. And then if you think about the educational requirement, that also is something that can be unfortunate for like urban versus rural communities. So like maybe there's rural communities that don't have a community college with this degree program,
Hmm.
but they're still required to get it. That's just going to discourage people from entering that field. Um, DC required all childcare professionals to kind of go back and get an associate's degree in early childhood education just a couple years ago, and now there's some pretty severe like childcare deserts just as existing
Hmm.
businesses shut down. So it's everything from like hand washing with warm water to like what kind of vitamins and minerals have to be in the snack time. Um, and of course, you can always understand like the reason behind this. Like it sounds like a good idea, but um, I think from talking to people and even my own experience now, it's like quality means something different to everyone, and so they're trying to like put everyone's definition of quality
Hmm.
into the regulatory document, and then it just is like
Right.
80 pages long.
It's
Um,
really basically a subsidy to people who have high monitoring costs. in a sense.
Hmm.
Because if you could do any couple who wants to put their kid into a childcare, right? Or oftentimes it'll be a single mother's probably putting their kids into childcare. Um, they could just go inspect and make sure it has the qualifications that they have. And if there's a serious problem, like they are lying to you, then you can sue. But but it's a subsidy basically to the people who don't want to have to spend the time on those search costs, right? And so it's not
Hmm.
really clear. And regulating in certain ways means you need to regulate in a way that the state can actually monitor. So it's substitutes into monitorable kinds of regulations or monitorable kinds of things, like you say in your dissertation. They can either measure the um, the inputs or the outputs in a sense. They can
Hmm.
either regulate the inputs or the outputs, but regulating the outputs is the real thing that people care about, the safety and well-being and education of the child. But that's so hard to measure that they proxy for that based on these things like square footage, which a couple that's actually trying to assess the particular needs of their child, right, is they would be much better equipped to judge that without needing to use any of these proxies, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I just use like Kersner's perils of regulation to kind of go through the categories of what we see happening. And so obviously barriers to entry is probably one of the saddest ones to me. It's like people who are really good with kids and really want to work with them are just discouraged from it because it's such a headache to deal with all the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, home in-home daycares are a really great solution for a lot of families. They're cheaper. They can sort of specialize by neighborhood and be really convenient. But they're really under fire for in a lot of states
Mm-hmm.
for sort of being harder to monitor and harder to regulate. They've gotten a lot of kind of they've been given some loopholes by some states, and now states are like cracking down on wanting all of the providers to be under the same code.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you just there are people that would otherwise be in this industry and helping with supply and price of this service, and presumably maybe enjoying this industry more than other things they're doing instead.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, barriers to entry, and then just the license can really serve as, like you said, like a proxy for um, other quality measures, other types of
Mm-hmm.
monitoring. And I have heard from parents too that because the daycares have really long waiting lists, if you do have an issue or you have questions and you're kind of prodding around trying to get answers for yourself and do some monitoring, then it's not oftentimes going to be very welcome if there's a plenty of other families who would gladly have your spot. So just kind of breaks those feedback loops, um, and then yeah, leads to you know another unintended consequence of just more kids being like outside of formal care, which is not what the regulators or bureaucrats like wanted.
Mm-hmm. But
So
the issue with proxies is also the issue with like even education as a proxy
mhm.
for skills, and that you can get a class of people who are really good at looking like they conform to that proxy, right? Once that measure once well what's this the Goodhart's law that once a measure becomes a standard, what is it? I'm forgetting it.
I
Something
don't
like
know.
that. Curtis, our friend Curtis is really into it, right?
Okay,
Once a measure becomes a standard, then it fails to be a measure or something like that. Something
that
like that.
sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the sense that if people know that they're being assessed by a test instead of someone looking inside of their mind and seeing how much knowledge they have, then they can learn how to do well on the test without gaining those skills if it's lower cost for them to do so. So there might
Yeah.
be an overrepresentation of child care facilities that know how to conform to these regulations, even if they don't have the qualities that those regulations are proxying for, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
I looked up. It's when a measure becomes a target, it ceases
That's
to be
it.
a good
That's it. That's
measure.
it. That's it.
Yeah.
I think we're supposed to try to write a paper related to that, so I better learn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you're taking, okay, here's what I have to do, and now I'm going to like devote all of my energy to checking these boxes, and there's trade-offs,
Yeah.
you're devoting less energy to kids and parents and you know what they might want you to be focusing on instead.
Mhm. And note this too, that that's a great lesson for students. Students like really latch onto that very obviously because they feel
Okay.
like they've been taught to the tests their whole life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Nice.
One example that just came up in my mind while we were talking here that I forgot about, but it was a big deal. It impacted my life in a bunch of ways when I was a kid, was when I was probably like 11 or 12. There was the big sex abuse scandal at Penn State with Jerry Sandusky and all that.
Yeah.
And that was obviously a national story, but a big Pennsylvania story
Hmm.
because people, Penn State sports fans and things like that. So they
Yeah.
knew the names from that, right? So it's really shocking. Um, and that inspired a lot of increased child protection laws in a lot
Hmm.
of places in PA that all came down all at once. So the different groups that I was involved in, I was a bit above the age that they were kind of targeting to protect, right? But not really, because different church things that I was involved in, or Boy Scouts, or uh, baseball, or things like that, right? All of a sudden, adults, like just random volunteer adults, needed to start doing licensing, right? And it
Hmm.
really hurt, and it really restricted the degree to which, like, you could provide childcare in order for
Yeah.
parents to do things at church or to just have Boy Scouts, such that you might want to look into it as an event study kind of
Hmm.
thing,
Yeah.
in that how many local small clubs or other volunteer organizations had to shut down because it was just too costly to keep running them because of that regulation, which of course is well-meaning, right?
Hmm.
But it's not necessarily clear that it even created the outcomes it was looking for, right?
Right.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm
Great
sure
point.
public school teachers had to go through that as well.
I'm sure. Yeah. Summer camps are dealing with it now.
Yeah, well, it was the whole scandal was about a summer camp, so yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yep.
Yeah. Um, One last thing about this, then. So, with typically with regulations that have a lot of unintended consequences, they might be intended consequences if there's any particular interest group that's interested
Sure.
in promoting those kinds of regulations that they have concentrated benefits to, that the dispersed costs are people who don't know they're going to be having a kid in 10 years and need to think about if there's a child care in their area, right?
Right.
Is there anything like that in this case? I don't think you talked about it too much in the chapter.
Yeah, I don't, and I want to do a more public choice look at this. Honestly, it's going to depend more on kind of more like state level interest groups and that kind of thing because there's so much variation. There are certainly some national childcare interest groups. One example of kind of the state level is with this Vermont occupational licensing thing. um, Proposed bill, to try to create a new board and a new whole system for licensing those employees. Um, One thing I noticed was just like the organization that is sponsoring like most of the support for the bill um, would basically like hold those positions on the new board, right? So it
Hmm.
just kind of would be like more of a revolving door thing. And yeah, I think there's just things like that going on in each state pretty much. Like, um, people working for these sort of non-governmental, organizations eventually, working for the the state board or whatever and kind of rotating through. But
Hmm.
that's the
Yeah.
best I can put together so far. It's kind of dispersed.
Yeah, it might be the worst of both worlds in that it's not a Baptists and bootleggers story. It's the Baptists are the bootleggers in that,
Yeah.
if you think about the bootleggers, you're like, oh, they're criminals, they suck, right? But
Hmm.
if you think of your kindergarten teacher and like she's the one that's rent seeking, then you can't go against your
Yeah,
kindergarten
yeah. They're
teacher.
just
They're so
like want
nice.
their jobs to continue.
Yeah.
And I'm also gonna pause right here and go get the baby, and I'll be
Oh,
back.
okay. Yeah. Let's pause. Okay, we're back here with Guy. This is, I guess, his first podcast appearance ever.
This is Guy's first podcast appearance. Yes.
Great.
So,
Okay, well
and he
that's
helps
fun
write
for
the
the
dissertation, so he's a
that's good, yeah.
co-author.
Yeah, he's in the he's the dedication, right?
It's dedicated to him, yeah, because
Yes.
he
Yeah.
was he was there for a lot of it, so
Yeah.
it's
Okay,
fitting.
cool. Well that's for the memory books. And I was thinking too that this episode is the unofficial Mother's Day special for Econ
It
Bikers.
is, yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah.
I'm here to represent.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into the last chapter. and then you can get back to the mothering. Um, the was primarily about the title is something like households as shock absorbers during a crisis, of focusing on the COVID pandemic. So, what do you mean by families or households uh, acting as shock absorbers during a pandemic or crisis?
Yeah, so Stephen Horwitz, Austrian economist who pioneered a lot of the, application of Austrian economics to family and household life. I'm sort of adding to and extending on his idea with this. So he has
Mm-hmm.
a paper that goes through um, a few different crises, the Great Depression, definitely, Katrina, and um, the the financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of, there may be another one in there, but he just identifies a couple patterns. One, that households expand in size during an economic downturn. So people sort of move in together, maybe you move in with the grandparents, or you get more, another roommate because rent's more expensive or something like that. People move back home. And they also expand in scope, basically, like they reincorporate functions that have been outsourced to the market. I think in the Great Depression, they called them like, or maybe like during World War II, they called them like victory gardens or something. Like people
Mm-hmm.
were really encouraged to grow their own food and can and things like that. And then um, I'm seeing these patterns in COVID, obviously, like education comes back in the home, childcare comes back in the home, a lot
Mm-hmm.
more cooking and, entertaining your kids instead of going to the movies. And also people did double up during COVID. So those two patterns are consistent, in
Double up.
this.
By that you mean like two families moving into one house, or
Yeah, more like moving in with more extended family members
Mhm.
under one roof. So lots of grandparents, coming into, well, grandparents is a little tricky because you're like supposed to isolate
Right.
from people, vulnerable populations or whatever, but people still really did like kind of create a bubble. And a lot of times that meant, moving in with extended family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I just kind of go through those patterns and how we saw them in COVID. And then really, this paper is more, and I'm going to revise it because one of my committee members was like, is it about family and their functions and like what they can do, or is it about COVID? And
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be more about like the, in epistemic and incentive, like
Mm-hmm.
advantages of families and making some of these adjustments and adaptations in a crisis, and then just using COVID as like a case study. Um,
Yeah, that was my thought reading it. Was you could talk about a lot of this in terms of just, okay, so going to a restaurant, there's a slightly higher chance I get COVID or I'm being instructed not to go, right? So
mhm.
there's a higher total cost to that market transaction. So instead, I'm gonna make a steak at home or something like that, right?
Yeah,
And that's all about just a single person, right? It would work.
right.
It would be analogous for a family or for a single person. So I think that
Yes.
there are a lot of interesting things in terms of um, it's more interesting to that's thinking of it sort of as a make or buy decision, but I think it's more interesting to dig deeper into the Coase or Williamson literature on firms and
Hmm.
what advantages firm coordination gives as opposed to market coordination, right?
Yep.
In terms of well, division of labor, it makes it more feasible to use more expensive fixed capital, right? Like a single person could own a blender and a microwave and an air fryer and all of these things, right? But they're going to be higher average cost per use if you're not sharing them with other people. And so the
Hmm.
family is just one example among many of a local governance solution to managing the use of these resources, kind of like more of an Ostrom sense, right?
Yeah.
That we're managing the use of this common good, which makes it lower cost for everybody. So it makes it easier for me to pivot away from market production of goods and things like that, right?
Yes. Yes. And talking about like, why is it easier for households and neighborhoods to create a new game plan than it was for like the school system?
Hmm.
And it's just kind of like
Yes. Oh, definitely.
it's kind of obvious, but at the same time, we make all these assumptions about what families and communities aren't capable of doing, and we like make those decisions for them. And so it's like COVID gave us a good example of, all right, how did people do this? Why were families a pretty good like last line of defense? It wasn't perfect. A lot of people were miserable.
Hmm.
But you see like these education pods and childcare swapping and things that like are often assumed people can't do or figure out.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Um, yeah, I thought that it was super fascinating, and I'm sort of I'm really interested in the fact that you can sort if you're looking at shock absorbers, say just the supply of other kinds of goods and services, how many things do we have in inventory, right? It's very difficult to measure what's the inventory of good family governance or communities that are here to provide those goods at a moment's notice, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know how many people have told other people like, oh, I can help you out in this situation, right? But that relationship, that's capital that they can depend on, right? Whether they realize it or not. I'll give you a little bit of time to take care of the kid. Yeah. Okay. So I had just asked about the fact that people have a capacity to respond to crises with their families, and we don't know who has that capacity, who doesn't have that capacity, right? So what do you think about that?
Yes. So, I mean, it's kind of something that I think like the disaster literature is trying to describe. It's like these these patterns, like the whole Katrina project, like goes through, and it's like, okay, so when your home gets wiped away by a storm, like what did people do in this specific context? Um, and so, yeah, I think like being connected to a religious like community or something similar was a really big variable um, in something like Katrina, right? But in COVID, it's like, certain neighborhoods fared better. Obviously, family structure is going to matter and just kind of like your networks. But surprisingly, like, or to me, unsurprisingly, that isn't stratified really by income. Like
Mm-hmm.
lower income neighborhoods may have better networks, like they may rely on each other more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't get into like the granular on that, and maybe I can the more data that we get on like what people were doing during COVID and the years following.
Yeah.
Um, but
And
yeah,
then
there's
another.
just like a whole stock of like relationships and you know people that you can call upon that aren't you know specifically like credentialed to do that certain thing.
Mm-hmm. Another confounding factor, though, with COVID will be the degree to which people conformed with regulations in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And regulations
Yeah,
state by state. That would be that. I mean, there's the regulation state by state, and then conformity within the state, right?
yeah, for sure, for
So,
sure. And states that were more strict, like you had to get more creative at the individual level
right,
or the
that's
household
interesting too.
level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, last thing that I'll ask you about is a topic that I've been thinking about that I want to do a conversation with another guy on my channel about soon. And it's related to all of this stuff that we've talked about. I think specifically this stuff on chapter 3 though, on households responding to crisis, right? Is what I'd want to call Tocquevillian growth, right? After Alexis de Tocqueville. And so in econ, we sometimes talk about Smithian growth, that is people finding out ways to divide up their labor more efficiently, lean into their own comparative advantage and use trade institutions to take advantage of a larger pool of wealth. Then sometimes
Yep.
we talk about Schumpeterian growth, that is, people innovating completely new ways of producing something, that disrupting a part of the economy, but making it perhaps more using resources more efficiently on the whole. But Tocquevillian growth is somehow in different societies there might be different capacities that might increase or decrease over time for us to produce different kinds of club goods and for us to trust other people in different clubs that can provide that can serve as really effective shock absorbers to these kinds of crises that you're talking about. And it's ambiguous to me, and I'm very interested in looking into in the future the degree to which um, Tocquevillian growth might might come in tension with those other kinds of growth, right? If leaning into Smithian growth means an extremely mobile labor market where I can move to any state in the U.S., right? That might undermine my ability to join local clubs and to develop especially long-term relationships with different kinds of people, right? So one of my main reasons that I wanted to move back to Southeast Pennsylvania, Delaware County in particular, living exactly in the house that I grew up in, to get this job here at Eastern was because I could be part of the lives of all of my friends that I've lived with for the rest of my
Yeah.
life and make new ones, right?
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is a good that allows me to take advantage of the kinds of things that you're talking about, right? So I wonder what you think about that on the whole, and that's something I think we're going to be thinking about for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we can wrap up there. It's a really interesting question, and my knee-jerk reaction is similar to the question of like, what do we do to get people to have more kids? I mean, it's kind of like a if you want it bad enough, like you'll you'll kind of like figure it out. I think if you want community like you did, you like leverage like the Tocquevillian. I mean, you leverage the Smithian growth in favor of those goals.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of like what like I don't think they're necessarily intention. They're intention, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a margin of entrepreneurship that is going to be hard to track, right? Because
Yes.
if you do more household production instead of market production, that doesn't show up in GDP. So the degree to which we're measuring growth, right, this will get undercounted.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like one of my hopes is to be able to do some field interviews with well, really like anyone who started a business because they wanted to spend more time with their kids.
Huh.
So like and obviously like I'm sitting here like in my kitchen holding a child. This is really weird in a way, but I think there are a lot of people doing like this dance of, you know, um, I'm doing a particular job in a particular career. I started this business because I wanted to like buy back time with my family. And it actually is like a luxury good, time with one's own children. People making more money are are spending like investing more of that time in their kids because they can, and they can like use their income to do that. So I think there are a lot of people like leveraging all the opportunities we have in a modern economy thanks to that kind of growth to then like turn around and do something that
Hmm.
looks like going backwards or like investing in community and family more.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, that's anecdotally what I think is how the two are married, and it's going to ebb and flow. People are going to realize, oh, I've been, you know, really focused on, making more money and growing my income, and start pursuing other things, and, make adjustments on that margin. So maybe we'll do that at a large scale.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, yeah, I think that the major obstacle is going to be people can learn how to substitute into that kind of activity, like, purchase on
yeah,
that margin, right?
yeah,
But the success of doing so or the value of doing so is not just dependent on how much time and effort other people put in, but the kind of time and effort they put in and the degree to which we coordinate the kind of time and effort that you put in, right? Like if
yeah,
church is like that, we can go, oh, we're just kind of the best church. We're going to be at church 7 days a week, 24 hours. Well, what if we all disagree on everything else, right? It's not going to be very
yeah,
good. It's just going to be fighting the whole time, right? So
right.
we wouldn't want to dedicate our whole lives to a church like that. That doesn't actually help anybody. So figuring out how to do those things, and those things can't be coordinated by prices. So we're going to have to
Hmm.
become human beings again,
Yes,
and
become human beings again, kind of like draw on intergenerational knowledge
mm-hmm.
and, you know, strategies that have been passed. Like, I mean, yeah, I guess like rely on your existing networks. Um, or I think people are like trying to like I think people are, searching out, okay, hey, do you want to build this kind of community with me? And like trying to
Hmm.
sort through where do we want to live? Where do we want to put down roots that would kind of have like a happy medium of both
Hmm.
opportunity and community. And that's an interjurisdictional competition thing that
Yeah.
like policy actually does affect.
Yeah. So that's going to be super interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing future things you write about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for uh thanks for having both of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Guy did a great job. Good live example in the trade-offs and difficulties of managing all these things. So
Yeah, for
thank you,
sure.
Guy, for
And I'm happy for the Smithian growth.
yeah,
Um and yeah, trying to have a little bit of both. So
great.
definitely
Okay.
wouldn't wish it away.
Yeah.
All
Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk soon.
right, thanks,
Bye.
Marcus.